Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing well. Thank you as always for joining me. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you every single morning. And the fact that you guys tune in so early every single day, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever. It means a lot. So thank you. Let's jump into the chat box, shall we, and say good morning to those joining us: Black Shine, Barry, Rob, Paul. We got Glenn, Amira, Matt G, Rancid, Maximius, Bakary, Lasagna, Stevie, Jakob, Mark, Paul, John, Chiadozi in the chat, Stephen, Damien, and plenty more of you guys as well. Thank you to everybody that is tuned in. It means a lot. The show is going to be in 3 parts this morning. We've got part 1, which is, as usual, I'll be running you through all the latest news regarding the club, and I'm going to chat about that for the first bit. And then in part 2, we'll be going into a preview of today's game against Newcastle United. As always, for our morning previews, I'll be joined by Mike for that. And then, of course, we'll be jumping into part 3 with your questions. So without further ado, let's not waste any time, shall we, and crack on with our first story of the day. And that was yesterday's victory, draw. It nearly, very nearly was a victory over Manchester City's under-21s. It was a very, very impressive performance by the Gunners. Harry Simi was actually on commentary on Arsenal.com. If you didn't manage to tune in, it certainly was a good listen. And it was a frustration because Arsenal had the lead up until the 87th minute. They actually came from 2 goals down in this game. And I think that if there was a chance for Arsenal in the PL2, you're going to have to try and beat Man City because they are always up there with the best side in that PL2 table. So very frustrating indeed that they couldn't quite get the job done. But in the end, they managed to still come away with the draw. But they'll be very disappointed indeed after what was such a great comeback to not, of course, get involved with this. So, yeah, that is certainly a foundation to build upon for Mehmet Ali's side. Now, there's reports coming out of Spain that Arthur Vermeeren, a player who I know next to nothing about, but he is very highly rated, currently playing for Antwerp, and he's been linked quite heavily with Barcelona initially, and now is being linked with Arsenal. He is an 18-year-old central midfielder, very, very a lot of kind of talk about this kid and how impressive he is. I mean, he's 18 years of age and he's playing for Antwerp, and he's got a 25 million euro valuation on transfer marks, which is quite high. It's a lot higher than what you see from a lot of actual Premier League players at that kind of level at 18 years of age. So clearly is doing impressive things in Belgium. But coming out of Spain, the reports are that Arsenal are said to be leading the race, it seems now, after Barcelona have pulled out of that. What kind of figure we'll see involved in any potential deal for Vermeeren remains to be seen. But midfield is an area that we know that Arsenal were trying to look at potentially signing somebody in. But you have to kind of question if it's a central midfielder that we're going for, and I asked Mikel Arteta the other day about Charlie Patino. You'd imagine that Arthur Vermeeren would take that spot, would, block that pathway. So, again, a player, if the links do indeed kind of ramp up, you can be sure that will provide you with as much insight and tactical breakdown on the player as we can leading up to that January transfer window. But we'll be across this story and keep you in tune with it if there are any developments or if I can do some digging on it as well. Now, Mikel Arteta, of course, faced the press yesterday. I was at London Colney to hear from the Arsenal manager ahead of today's game against Newcastle United. And there were some very interesting lines on this. I'll start with kind of him talking about Wednesday. I don't think he was too keen to kind of dig up the disappointments of Wednesday, but he was asked about his analysis of the game. And he says, every time you have a defeat, it takes a few days to get over, but the full focus is now on Newcastle. There are obviously things that we had to do much better in the game, especially the way that we competed and the way that we conceded the goals. I don't think the scoreline reflects what happened in the game at all, but we should have done much better. And I do tend to agree. I know that people talk about it as a disappointing performance, losing 3-0 or 3-1 rather at West Ham. But if we are honest with ourselves, Arsenal dominated the majority of the game, and West Ham really were limited to the chances that they were able to create. They just took the ones that they got, and they were better chances than we ultimately created for ourselves. But I think there were still positives from it. Ødegaard coming back, scoring, I think, showcased what we've been missing a little bit, perhaps, from him. He was asked about Smith Rowe's injury because, of course, we only found out about Smith Rowe's injury ahead of that game against West Ham, to which we were told there was a knee issue. And he says nothing's changed. As I said, I think he'll be out for weeks. How many will determine in relation to how he progresses in the first few weeks, especially. It's a big blow because he was getting some momentum and some minutes, and we'd started to get the Emile that we needed. But unfortunately, he's going to be out again. What this means for Smith Rowe's future, again, is it's going to be a frustration for Arteta. It's going to be a frustration for Smith Rowe's biggest fans. And, I'm certainly one of those. But it's difficult to foresee him being able to work his way back into a squad when he can't play. Very, very tricky indeed. And then there was a really interesting comment about injuries. And I don't know if you caught this specifically, but he was asked on whether he would be welcoming back any of his injured players. And he says, we have another training session, so there's a possibility, but I don't know. Now, the only players that are out are Jesus, Partey, Smith Rowe, and Timber, who are all, we've been told, out for, quote, weeks. So I don't know who he's referring to regarding this possibility. I guess the most obvious one would be Jesus, because he's been quite coy about how quickly he can recover from those injuries. But I would be shocked if indeed it is Jesus, because they were talking, and although we said things like December and things like that, I'm not sure how accurate those reports are. But I think that the idea of somebody coming back that's out seems a little bit like, I think he's just trying to keep the opposition guessing. That would be my assumption of what Arteta is talking about there, because I honestly have absolutely no idea who he could be referring to. I was also at the press conference, of course, as well, and we did manage to get some words to the manager discussing Granit Xhaka in particular. He was asked specifically, I did the bloody question. I asked Arteta about Xhaka and kind of the evolution, if you like, since Granit Xhaka has moved on from the club. And he said, Granit was a key player. He played nearly every game for us, and we knew it was going to take some time, just like it took him some time, especially when I changed his role. There were a lot of questions about it, and then he evolved in a great way, and here it will happen the same. And it's those last few words in that answer that I really latched onto yesterday, where he says, here it will happen the same. What he's saying there is effectively promising that the success that we saw with Xhaka, he's expected to see that same success with the players that replaced him, be that Havertz, be that Vieira, be that Jorginho and Rice playing there. It's very interesting that he was very committal to that comment specifically. So I think that what's interesting there is that even though he's recognised how important Xhaka was, he's very leaning on this idea that there will be success with this midfield. I also asked him about our away form. Since Arteta came in, those days of where we would struggle at big six away sides or in difficult away games, you remember the reputation Arsenal had of never being able to win the big games away from home. That has gone. You think about even this season, we've gone to Seville, a place really difficult to win at. We've won. Yes, we went 2-0 down at Chelsea, but we came back and kept that to a 2-2 draw. We've already beaten Man City at home this season, a very difficult game. And last season, we went to Newcastle, of course, and won 2-0, despite everybody thinking that we would be comfortably beaten in that fixture. And I asked him what he thinks has changed, what he thinks he's done that's been able to drastically change that away form into a positive direction. And he says belief and then performances. First of all, be so convinced that you can go to Newcastle and fully believe that you're going to win the game. It has to be really clear what you have to do to achieve that. Then obviously quality and talent to get the performance that we need, and that's down to the players. And it got me thinking, because he's talked a lot about belief, and that's a key thing. And it makes me think, what wasn't happening before? Like, with these players when under at the end of Arsene Wenger's tenure, under Unai Emery, why weren't they believing that they could win those games? And how has Arteta drastically been able to change the mindset of that belief? I think there's a lot more to it than just belief, and maybe Ozzy was just being kind of a bit broad about it. But I did find it interesting that belief is the key go-to. Is it all, and was it all in Arsenal's heads as to why they weren't able to get the results that they wanted away from home in those big fixtures? And we'll hope, of course, that Arsenal can do that today against Newcastle. And speaking of which, we're going to welcome Mike into the fold in just a second as we preview this afternoon's game on Tyneside. Hello, Mike, mate. How are you? You good? You well?
I am very well, thanks, Tom. It's somewhat warm, 36 degrees in Perth today. So
lovely stuff. My other half landed in Sydney yesterday. Well, I say yesterday. Today for you. Yesterday for me. And she's going to have, I'm sure, a very lovely time out in Australia.
Sure
although she did say that the flight is the worst thing she's ever done. Like,
oh yeah, it's not nice. It's not nice, whichever way you slice it.
No, they stopped off in Singapore and had a bit of a break, and then obviously got on another 8-hour flight. And yeah, it's definitely the thing that stops me from going to Australia and New Zealand. I think is the thought of that flight, both there and back. So yeah, hopefully she can enjoy herself before prepping herself for that flight back. But yes, Mike, Newcastle away from home, very difficult game. We were worried about this game last season and we came through it. How are you feeling ahead of this one?
I think it is obviously one of the top 3 most difficult places to go in the Premier League, without a doubt. The Geordies are mental, and having lived there for
in their support,
5 years, I experienced that to the nth degree, and they make it very, very uncomfortable for anybody coming to St James's.
They do.
On top of that, of course, we've got some key figures out which we'd rather have in. Of course, we've not got Jesus and Partey. We would rather have than have not, which seems to be rare these days. And that obviously adds an extra layer of that takes away a chunk of quality from what we can do. But then Newcastle have got Isaac missing, they've got Botman missing, both of whom are top draw players as far as they're concerned. So. And we've seen them lead goals with Botman not being there.
Yeah.
So mixed, but relatively confident that we'll get a result. And not unoptimistic is possibly there.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of fans are very worried, about this game. So it's good to hear some optimism. I'm optimistic in some ways. I think that those injuries that Newcastle suffered have taken away some key parts of that squad. Isaac was brilliant. I thought in the away game that we played in last season, playing on the left with Wilson through the middle. Murphy has been really, really good for them as well, and he's going to be missing. Tonali's obviously banned as well for the game, so they won't have him. Bruno Guimaraes is on 4 yellow cards, so there's something of a tightrope he has to kind of tread, I suppose, in some ways to avoid a suspension. But he's a very dangerous player anyway, and I wouldn't expect necessarily that to have too much of an effect on his performance. And as you mentioned, Sven Botman has been massive. The real foundation for the growth of Eddie Howe's new look Newcastle side. And if we have a look just quickly at some of their recent results in the table, maybe those injuries have started to affect them. They drew away at Wolves in a game which they were very fortunate to win, actually, because of that penalty decision that some people have said that Anthony Taylor has been demoted to the Championship for. According to Dale Johnson of ESPN, that's not the case. He's not been demoted to the Championship. It's just kind of his turn in terms of refereeing to go down, and he's very assured by that, which he has his very good sources at the PGMOL, of course. But how much do you believe it? I don't know. In terms of the game before that, they lost to Dortmund, of course, at home. I think that was their first home defeat all season and in quite some time, maybe even since we last beat them. I think that was their last home defeat. Oh no, sorry. The Liverpool game, of course, where Liverpool went down to was it 10 or even 9 men? I think it was 10. 10. And Nunez scored right at the end. So they've lost that game, of course, as well. So Man City, of course, very, very narrowly beat them, only just 1-0. But they did have some interesting games where they lost to Brighton. They drew away with West Ham, of course. And I'm not saying that West Ham are a bad team. We've just lost to them ourselves. But in the league, they've not been particularly, effective in the same kind of way. But then they've had some really big scorelines, like beating Aston Villa 5-1. They've beaten PSG at home 4-1 in a really impressive win. They beat Sheffield United 8-0, earlier this season. So it's, whatever we can do, they can do better when playing Sheffield United. It seems smashing them by 8 goals. But it's going to be interesting to see how things go. Let's have a look at what we're picking, Mike. Mike, let's go for your 11 first. Tell us what you've gone for.
Okay, so for those who are listening, it's somewhat reluctantly.
I,
Raya and
I know what you
goals.
meant by that when you said, but those who are listening, as in like on audio platforms only.
Yes,
But
sorry.
you said it like for those that are paying attention.
Yeah, come on, guys. Come on, wake up.
Keep
Yes. White, Saliba, Gabriel, and Tomiyasu, I guess, was possibly the only debate. But I think his performances of late have been more than justified his place. Midfield, I've gone for Jorginho, Rice, and Odegaard. I think that Jorginho had a great game against them last season. It was probably his game of the season for us, I think. And Rice is a gimme. Odegaard was given minutes against West Ham, I think, just to give him a few, and good to see him pop one in, and he's more than due a good game. Up front, Saka, Martinelli, I think, pick themselves, and then the other major debate is what do we do up front? And I plump for Havertz. Two reasons for that. I think Newcastle are fairly physical at the back, and I think Havertz may be better able to cope with that. And the second thing is Eddie goes away. It really is that simple. Is it 28 games or something ridiculous? He hasn't scored in an away match.
Havertz, yeah, maybe.
Sorry.
I don't know what the record is exactly, but you could be right. And so you've picked him as your striker.
So I picked Havertz as the striker, not Eddie. Sorry.
No, I think it's
clear as mud, wasn't it?
And Martinelli's your star man.
Yes, he looked exceptional when he last played, and I think that's where the goals are going to come from. I think he's got Trippier to deal with, but I think he's possibly got Trippier's number now.
He obviously glides forward, doesn't he, Trippier, and opens up space behind, which you've got to hope
absolutely. And that's what I think. Yeah, that's where I think he'll be exploited. I think that the pace of Martinelli will either mean that Trippier sits back and it creates less impact for them going forward, or the spaces behind for Martinelli to exploit.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. Are you? Odegaard we've been missing for a fair few weeks. What I wanted to pick you up on though is the Raya pick, because obviously when we've done our preview shows, you've been very adamant about Ramsdale and picking Ramsdale. What made you, deviate away from that? Not principle, but headstrong pick of Ramsdale previously.
I still don't think Ray is a better keeper, but if the plan had been to potentially move towards a system whereby it was, as Mikel suggested, going to be, we'll pick horses for courses, then Ramsdale should have started against Sheffield United, give him a little rest between the sticks to get used to being in his penalty box again, and then he would have been ideally placed for West Ham. And that would have been two games where I think a judgment could be made, and I think he would get the confidence from that. I'm not sure in terms of his mental state at this stage that he needs a good game, and I'm not sure firing him into St James's Park is the game to do. So it's not from a point of view of talent; it's a point of view of preparedness, if that is a word. I think. So that's why Raya for this game, and then we'll see what happens next.
No, I think I've gone for Raya, and I think that the midweek game against West Ham, I didn't think it was a performance that people should have been pointing their fingers at Ramsdale necessarily for the game. I know that the third goal is like, you could argue maybe we could do a bit better, but it takes a deflection and it's a split second, of course. And I think it's luck if it hits him and goes wide or goes in, and it's just a bit unlucky that one. But Raya, he's not exactly inspired calm between the sticks for us, but he clearly does the things that Arteta wants a goalkeeper to do, I think, better than Ramsdale in regards to some distribution and sticking to what Arteta wants. Maybe because Ramsdale, maybe a little bit more impulsive, a little bit more emotional, is willing to kind of deviate from the plan slightly and go long, and maybe that's cost him his place because Raya is more disciplined, regarding what the instruction from Arteta is.
Sure.
But I think Ramsdale showed, especially in that Brentford game, how good he is as a goalkeeper with his shot stopping. So it's difficult. I just hope that whoever starts keeps a clean sheet, because there will be question marks if they don't. From my side of things, I have gone with Eddie. I find it just kind of crazy that he scored a hat-trick in his last Premier League game. I've seen, like yourself, Mark, I've seen so many people drop him. It's like, I get it. Like, he didn't have a great game in midweek, but he didn't really get the best service. He had a couple of balls into the box, which were very difficult to deal with. I understand why people want Havertz, because he offers you a target. He offers you kind of something to, especially away from home against Newcastle, to give a long ball up to at times. I get that. And I've even talked about Havertz as his best role probably being in a forward line. The reason why I've moved this, and I think I've picked exactly the same team, bar I think Jorginho, which I've moved Havertz in, and Nketiah's gone up top. So just the one change from yours is, and I wrote about this yesterday after the press conference and after Arteta was talking about his belief in the midfield being a success like Xhaka was. And I know that some people want to see Zinchenko playing a midfield role, and I do think there's potentially a pathway for that to happen in the future. Where I'm at with Havertz is that we're at a point in his Arsenal career still so early on, where I think fans are right to have their concerns, they're right to have their worries. But I think the only way in which it succeeds is if we give him consistency, if we give him the belief, those minutes, and that confidence. I know that we've been doing that so far. And I know that I'm struggling, like other people are struggling with the Havertz thing, but I think you have to stick with it, because we've stuck with it, and yet we're still joint on points with Man City. 2 points off the top, and we have, I think, got to ride out this storm in some ways. I just think he needs belief, and I just think that if you can give the guy belief and you can give the guy some confidence, that we will see a better Havertz. And I always said, and someone left a comment on my video yesterday when I chatted with Andrew Arsblog yesterday about, Tom, you've talked about 2 years, that you give players 2 years, but you're talking already about your concerns about Havertz. And I'm like, yeah, I do give players 2 years, and I would give Havertz 2 years. I'm not selling him, I'm not selling him in the summer, but I think that fans are right to have a right to the opinion that they've got concerns. Some people say not this game and that it's not the right one. And, if I was a betting man, I'd probably bet on your midfield, to be honest, Mike. I think Jorginho will probably start with Rice. But I think that you have to start a consistent Premier League 11. We've not got Partey for the next however long, and then not have him again. We're not going to have him for the January period either, when he goes off to the African Cup of Nations. I just think that you have to give the guy some consistency and the opportunity again to show it. The first half against West Ham, I really enjoyed his performance. I thought he was good. I thought he put himself about. I thought he was physical. He won tackles. He won fouls. Second half, it trailed off after kind of our heads dropped. And I think that that's natural for a player that struggled with confidence. When the players around him are losing belief, that he loses that belief as well. And I think we just need to play him in the best possible team, and with Rice behind him, and give him that opportunity to flourish. But tell me your thoughts on where you are with him.
That's the key. That's the key point. We need to play him in the best possible team, I think. One thing that struck me about Wednesday, and I don't want to regurgitate everything that's been done, and you guys did a great show afterwards, by the way. One of the problems with rotating significantly, I think, is that we lose the good that one player does for another player, if that makes sense. So Odegaard, we know, plays well with Saka, and Saka plays well with White, and Saliba plays well with Gabriel. And these sort of pairings around the pitch seem to bring everybody up, or those particular individuals up. I haven't seen Havertz and Nketiah work together yet.
Yeah.
And so if Jesus was playing rather than Nketiah, I think that would be giving Havertz the best chance, if that makes sense. I mean, it's really early days, and you said that straight from the get-go. We're only a handful of games in, but in terms of how those players line up in the top five, or the front five, if Havertz is joining them, then I think he possibly will thrive more when Jesus is there rather than Nketiah. And so
Yeah,
that's
I think
to
that's
have them
fair.
both in the same team. I'm just I really hope I'm wrong. I really, really hope I'm wrong. I hope that Eddie goes there and smacks in another hat trick
Yeah, yeah.
and away we go again. But I'm just the other
Trepidation.
issue I think I had with putting Jorginho in was
Hmm.
maybe there's times during the game where that sort of double pivot works at the back, and then so we're sitting back, and then I think Jorginho and Rice are probably stronger, and then Rice pushes forward when we're moving
He was
upwards. So
great in this fixture last year, Jorginho. He was
yeah,
probably man of the
he
match.
was, and
He was excellent.
I think maybe there's a bit of bias on my part thinking about how well he played in that game
Yeah, maybe.
um, that I'm bringing in, but he
If
seemed
if
to
he
have the
starts with
number.
Rice, I'm not going to be upset with that. I think that would be
Sure,
a very sensible choice to play Rice and Jorginho away from home.
yeah.
You know, and you know, if it's this or if it's yours or if it's Nketiah where Havertz was for you and Havertz on the bench, I'm not going to have too many complaints, you know, about that. I don't think there's too
Mm,
much variation that we can have. I know people are suggesting Zinchenko in the midfield, but that's a
okay,
very big call to make for the first time in this specific fixture
absolutely,
to play somebody
absolutely.
in
There
a
was
role
another
that they've
fixture.
never played for Arsenal. You know, we
Yeah,
say that he plays basically in midfield, but you're playing in midfield coming in as the left back. So you have a player in that position that would also be coming into that position. You are fulfilling a different role in the Arteta system if you start as part of the midfield. So
mm,
I have no issue with him starting maybe the Sevilla home game in midfield and seeing how
yeah,
that works. You know, that would be a good way to go about it, or the Burnley home game that we've got coming up next week as well. So there is chances, you know, there is opportunities for that to be tried. And I agree with Clive on the Vision podcast where he talks about using Zinchenko maybe as the successor to what Jorginho is really. And I think there is
mm,
definitely scope for it to happen. I'm just not sure that this is the right game. I've seen some people in the chat book suggesting, you know, why not use El Neni? And again, I just think that to throw El Neni into for his first start of the season in this game is a big call to make in this specific game. I'm not saying that he couldn't do it. He's been in big games before. He's only 31 years of age. You know, he's not like people, I think, underestimate how I say young. He still is
mm.
31 in the context of a footballer, you know, but he is the same age as Jorginho, for instance. So I think that there is scope for him to have uses, but I'm not sure this is the game for it. We're going to move to part 2 now, and your question, guys. So start throwing them into the chat box, and we'll get some predictions as well in a bit as well. So let's go to that. Okay, we're going to jump into the chat box. Before I do that, I just realised I haven't actually checked what time my train is. It's in my head now, and it's at 10:20. So I got just under 2 hours. So I should be okay. We should be fine for 15 minutes or so, and then I'll get ready to go. Still need to pack. So I'm actually staying. It's one of those places, Mike, where if you go all the way out to Newcastle, it's like you ain't getting back on the train, you know,
Yeah,
because it's a long way to go. So yeah, I've
yeah.
still got to pack and stuff. Right, let's jump into the chat box then and take some of your thoughts. Sabro says, and regarding the Zinchenko chat, he's been terrible, so shouldn't be starting his dinner, let alone a game for us. I think that we've obviously been a bit disappointed with some of his performances for sure, but I'm hoping that we see that improve. Front Yard says, Tom, I don't think Arsenal fans are ready for the ruthlessness Arteta will need for the next level if we want to improve. We will need better players, which means selling the likes of Smith Rowe and some other fan favourites. Do you agree with this?
It's going to be. I think it depends on the player. I think ESR is obviously has the Hale End linkage, but I think that I think it's a necessity. We can't hang on to players for sentimentality, and that includes Ramsdale, I'm afraid. So
Yeah.
if we do need to get to the next level, that's where we want to be, and so I think if Wednesday did show us something, is that we perhaps haven't, although we've got the depth, we haven't possibly got the depth in quality that we may like. If we're serious about winning Premier Leagues on a regular basis, or at least challenging for them, and serious about going deep into Europe, there's no doubt that the squad needs another level. And we've talked about that all season. We've talked about wanting competitors for Xhaka. We're talking about adding another striker. We certainly need another central midfield player. So ruthless is what it means. And today, okay, maybe Havertz accepted, but the jury's still out on that one. But today, the record is actually pretty good in terms of bringing people in to take us to move the needle, and we need to keep on doing that. So,
yeah, agreed. If you look at the amount of money Arsenal has spent, the amount of money that is hits rather than misses is a lot. And there's some players that there's juries out on, like Havertz, and to a lesser extent Vieira still as well. But for the most part, you look at the money that Arsenal have spent. Rice, what we bought, is a hit. Partey, a hit, even though he's had his injury problems. Erdegaard, hit. Zinchenko, hit. Jesus, hit. The amount of money that we spend in his key areas: Tomiyasu, Ben White, Gabriel, Ramsdale. We've had such success in investment. And this summer, after that success and those so many hits, they took a risk on Havertz, and that may not pay off. We'll have to wait and see. And I'll certainly be very critical of that if it doesn't pay off, because I don't know whether or not this was the right time to take a risk in the market with Arsenal on the up. And I think maybe we should have gone for something more of a sure bet, like a Maddison or a Szoboszlai, somebody like that. But we'll have to wait and see, because it might turn out that we have this conversation in 6 months' time, and we're looking back on Havertz, as Andrew was telling me yesterday, and saying, I can't believe we were so disparaging about Havertz, because he's doing amazing things now. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. We can only go off, obviously, what we have seen. Mel says availability is the best ability. Smith Rowe, Tierney, Partey, and to some extent Jesus are not fulfilled in that criteria, in my opinion. But among all of these, I would still keep Jesus. Do you think that looking at a player's injury record even matters anymore, Mike? Because Partey, not injured before he came to Arsenal, injured all the time. Timber didn't really have an injury, record with Ajax, out for the rest of the season. Jesus, I know he had some injuries at Man City, but I don't think he missed as many games as consistently as maybe he's missed for us. Smith Rowe, prior to coming through from Hale End, I'd never really heard of any issues that he had, and then he's had his problems. So do you think it's worth even assessing a player's injury record before they arrive? Because it just seems it doesn't matter anymore.
It's beginning to seem that way, isn't it? And it's not just Arsenal either. You look at Chelsea, Man City. I can't remember the last time De Bruyne was out for any length of time. But it's not.
Obviously, De Bruyne is out now. Was he out for Wolfsburg like before he joined? I can't remember that he was. But he's had injury issues at City, but I don't know about before.
Yeah. So maybe it's an intensity of the Premier League thing, perhaps. You obviously don't want. You want to have a look and make sure nobody's carrying something that's recurring, but I don't think quite the deal breaker it possibly used to be, because, as you say, we've had so many players come in and injury-free, apparently, and then pop up with that.
Even Rice, like the king of availability, went off against Spurs with a problem and missed the Brentford game, I think, as well with an injury. So it is staggering how quickly these injury things happen. MM says I can deal with injury-prone players like John Stones, for instance, but when it's crunch time, they need to deliver. And I think that, we need to sign players. I'd much prefer, a player, if you're talking about injuries or whatever, I'd much prefer having a player that's got, has had injuries or whatever, but has a record of delivering on the biggest stage compared to a player that is always available, but has question marks about their, delivering on a consistent basis. So is it better to have somebody that's always available, or somebody that there's a little bit of a question mark about regarding their fitness, but whenever they play, they're always on the top of their game? And that's why the best ability is availability. I see that, but there are players sometimes that are always fit but don't always deliver, and maybe it's the other that you need. What do you think?
There's a line, and I'm not sure how to draw this line, but you look at Partey, for example, who has had some exceptional games for us, absolutely world class on occasion. But you can't plan a team for someone or to bring somebody who's going to be available for a third of the season. So there's got to be a line where that where that sort of cliche, which seems to be banded around every social media channel these days, is a reality that there needs to be at least a minimum amount of availability and quality when they come up. Smith Rowe, for example, unfortunately, hasn't delivered quality when he's had the opportunity. So even if he comes back, and even if he does particularly well, he has a need to step up significantly for him to be, no matter how much is available, unless he moves forward in terms of his performance, he's not going to be the player that we want or need, no matter how much he is available. So yeah, we want someone who's going to perform when they're here, but there's a line that says, no, it's not enough. Not if we're building a squad that want to challenge on all fronts.
Schlamed says, sorry I was late. I had to get some food after work, but it's almost 2 a.m, but I'm already setting alarms to get up for the game. Vamos, Arsenal. George says, do we need to take a look at the way that Arsenal are training players in order to cut down injuries? We always go to the conspiracy, don't we? It's always the conspiracy. It's always there's something wrong with the medical department, or there's something wrong with the training pitches, or there's something wrong with the analysis of the players before they arrive. Do you think there is something always to be said that every club has injuries and every club loses players, but we're just so locked into Arsenal that it feels for us that it's happening more than any other club?
I haven't got the stats to back it up, but that's what it. But that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel as though there are many clubs without significant injuries this year, or even for the last couple of years, to be honest. And it is very easy to just focus in on what's happening in our world. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to do some analysis on that and see if there is, do a league table of significant injuries. And yeah, John's made a good point in the chat box there. We've already referenced that Newcastle have got significant injuries as well. So they're not exempt either. It's something that it's what you need a squad for. Not only to give people rest, but also to manage the injury situation.
Absolutely. I struggle with the training pitch conspiracy. I struggle with the medical department theory, because I cannot stress enough how much research and investment and science goes into these pitches, into the training, into the coaching, how much training and experience and qualifications the medical staff, the coaching staff will have, to suggest that these people and this infrastructure is somehow flawed because injuries happen. I just think it's crazy. I find it crazy, because if people really understood the level of, as I say, all of those different qualities that go into it, it's not a thing. Injuries happen. Football's a contact sport. Players have just in their own makeup, some players are going to be more susceptible to injuries than others, just because the way they're built biologically, through matter of chance. So injuries are going to happen. It's high intensity, and it's just, I always struggle with the conspiracy side of things about training and the pitches and the medical staff and things like that. Like somebody on the medical staff will leave and somebody else will come in, and suddenly we haven't had an injury in 3 months, and people are like, that's what it was. You're like, no, it's just because we've been quite lucky for the last 3 months with injuries, because they do happen. If they weren't getting injured in training, and if people then start and we weren't performing well on the pitch, people would say, well, maybe it's to do with the training. Maybe we're not training intensely enough, because, and there's always got to be something, and as Wontong Suit says in the chat, our medical department has changed quite a few times in the last few years. I doubt that is the reason. So yes, there you go. We are going to bring the show to a close. We're going to get predictions from Mike and you guys in the chat box before we do so. But while you're thinking of your predictions, I do want to tell you all a very important thing that happened yesterday. I met Win. It happened. I met Win the dog, and she's glorious in all her doggish ways. So, yes, it was a great moment. I was just on my laptop kind of typing up a a couple of prep questions and prepping what I was going to ask and things like that and tweaking some stuff. And I just saw the Lynn, who works behind the desk at the Emirates for the media, with the lead in hand, walking Wyn through the press lounge at the Arsenal's London Colney training ground. So great thing. As people know, I'm allergic to dogs, but it's only kind of when I'm around them for long periods. But yeah, certainly got to have a mini cuddle, and it's great. It was a great day. It was the highlight of my day. And you know that, Mike, they say that dogs help therapy-wise. It's so true. Like, it's such a true thing. So
that's fantastic.
Predictions, mate.
2-1 to us.
2-1 to Arsenal. Scorers.
Yeah. Martinelli and Xhaka.
I am going to go with, I think I said 2-0, which is very brave to go the clean sheet at Newcastle. But we did it last year, and I think that's why I'm going safe. So I'm going to go 2-0, and Nketiah and Havertz. I feel like, we've been saying Ben White Screamer for a long time, and it very nearly happens on quite a few occasions. So maybe we need to start changing this to a Havertz Screamer, and will this into existence and, increase the chances, because we are, we're superstitious people here. So there you go. People asking for a picture of Wyn the dog. There is one in the Discord server. So another benefit of being in our Discord server is you can see a picture of Wyn the dog. Right, let's go to see what you guys are saying. Grantley Poo says 3-1. Alani says 3-1 Arsenal. Emeka says 2-1 Arsenal. Anne says 1-0 to the Arsenal. Som2 says 2-1 to the Arsenal. Jean 3-1. Rancid 2-0. John says 2-1. Sabra's going for a 3-0. Johnny Bell's going for a 0-0. Mel says 3-2. Alex says 2-2 with Xhaka and Eddie to score. Let's go to Valus. Says 3-2 with Ben White Screamer. He'll answer for the OG that he scored. MM says 1-0 to the Arsenal. Martinelli late winner. Arsenal for life says 2-0 or 3-1 to the Arsenal. Havertz assist and scores. I'm praying for it. Cass says 2-2. Maximir is 2-1. My question, Mike, is if I offered you a draw now, would you take it? I'm going to put a poll into the chat box and just get their thoughts on this as well. If I offered you a draw away at Newcastle, it doesn't matter on the scoreline. I'm not going to say anything to do with that. But if I offered you a draw and no injuries or anything like that, no injuries, so I'm going to say that you can avoid injury as well. No, we won't do that because that makes it a bit unfair. Just a draw. Would you take it?
Oh, that's a horrible question.
I asked this to Andrew obviously yesterday, and he said no.
Yeah, I'm sort of same campish. It doesn't feel right to say yes, but
yeah,
there's a big part of
Is a draw a good result?
I think a draw's okay. I don't think a draw does us any damage. I think a loss would see the fan base meltdown. And confidence in the players would not be would probably not be in a good place. So I'd accept a draw. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that you take a draw at Newcastle away. As you said, the first thing you said, I think, was it's the third most difficult place in the league to go to. So getting a draw there is not a bad result. Chat box, I've put a poll in there. You've got a couple of minutes to vote before we wrap up, and we'll get some thoughts on that. I can tell you that immediately after 50 votes, no is leading the way at 63% at the moment. Yes at 37%. So we'll catch up on that in just a second. I'll get some closing thoughts on that question. John says a draw would mean that we're still unbeaten, and I think we'd all take it really. The head. Oh, sorry, the head takes a draw, but the heart desires a win. Yes, I agree in that sense for sure. I think my head's probably in that same space. Is thinking a draw's a good result, but my goodness me, I love just rolling the dice just to see if Arsenal could get a win here. Cass says, yes, I would take a draw, especially if we played them the same way as we played the Chelsea game. Very true. We'd all have taken a draw when we were 2-0 down against Chelsea, but perhaps we wouldn't have done before the game. This is a much trickier test, of course, as well. So we've got to hope that we're on it for the whole of the game rather than the last 20 minutes. Somtu says, no, though. The boys need to bounce back after that West Ham defeat. Vala says, if we draw against good teams and win against the rest, I think that we have a fine chance in the end. So let's go unvincible. Maximir says, no, go all in. We've got to go for the win. And looking at the poll now, as we close on 100 people to have voted, 38% of you have said yes, but 62% of you have said no. So there you go. The majority are saying that they would roll the dice on today's game, and I have complete respect for that. So I will, as I am such a sheep, I will go with you, and I will certainly be gambling on potentially getting a result as well, and hope that we can do it. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for jumping on with me this morning.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you once again for inviting me along. Thanks to all the kind comments in the chat box. It's been a pleasure and a privilege as always.
Indeed. So thank you, Chatbox. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Do give Mike plenty of love in the comment section as well. And I'll be back tomorrow from a Newcastle hotel room discussing the game that takes place, of course, at 5:30 p.m. this afternoon. If you would like some updates, if you're unable to watch the game for whatever reason, of course, I'll be covering the game from St James's Park on our Football.London live blog. So do make sure that you tune in for that. And I'll be at Mikel Arteta's press conference after the game rather than in the mix zone this time. So to hear from the boss, hopefully after a really, really positive victory. Right. We'll see you again tomorrow morning, bright and early, 8 a.m. Let's keep those fingers crossed for a big result. Mike, thank you very much once again for your time. And we will see you all on the next one. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay well. And as always, up the Arsenal.